Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mr. Rowe. We're going to look at Algebra 2, Part B. This is Lesson 11, Systems of Equations. This is going to cover the part where you have to solve systems by substitution. So I think that's like 3 to 4 of the problems. And so let's get started. Let's see what we've got to here. So if you're given a system and you're asked to solve by substitution, what you need to do is you need to isolate one of the variables in one of the equations. So what I look for is a situation like this where y is already coefficient 1, so it's kind of easy to isolate it. And all I got to do here is subtract 2x from each side. And so now what I do is I take this expression, and anywhere I see y in the other equation, so right here, I'm going to replace y with negative 2x minus 7. So that'll look something like this. And now it's just a matter of solving for x. So I'll have to distribute first. I will combine like terms. So these combine to make negative 11x. And then you're going to finish solving from here. It's a two-step equation now. I'm going to finish solving this on the next slide here. Two-step equation, so I'm going to add 28 to each side. And that's going to give me positive 11, negative 17 plus 28. And so when I divide, I'll get x is negative 1. And so now I have to figure out what y is, because the solution is an ordered pair, so I already know that x is negative 1. I've got to find the y to go with it. So what I want to do is I want to use one of the equations from the problem. And I've got actually 3 choices now. So I can choose to use this equation, I can use the second equation, or I can use this equation where I isolated the variable. That's typically the one you want to use because you found the other variable. So I'm going to use that equation. And make sure I copied that right. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to substitute negative 1 in right there. And that's going to end up giving me negative 2 times negative 1 is positive 2 minus 7, and that's going to be negative 5. And so there's my final answer. So isolate one variable in one of the equations, use that equation as a substitution in the other equation, and then solve for the first variable. Then once you do that, use that in one of the equations to find the second solution to the variable, and then write your answer as an ordered pair. Okay, the second example. This is where we get into a quadratic linear system. So the first equation is a linear equation, negative 4x minus 9. The second one is a quadratic. So if you were to graph these two, one would be a parabola, the other would be a line. So when you solve by And I kind of suggest that you always solve these by substitution. You could use elimination, but I think substitution is the better way to go. So let's take a look at what we got to do here. We already have y equals and y equals. So I can use that as my substitutions. So I'm just going to take this and replace that y with that. And that's going to give me x squared minus 6 equals negative 4x minus 9. Quadratic equation, so I need to get all terms on one side. And I always like to move it to the side where the quadratic term already is. So I'll move all the terms over to the left side. Those are going to cancel out to leave me a 0. And then what I have is x squared plus 4x plus 3. And now I'm going to solve by factoring. So how do I factor this? Well, what I do is I look at that last term, the c, and I need to find factors of 3 that do this, add to equal this. So the factors of 3, there are only 2 factors of 3, are 3 and 1. To get my signs, I look at this sign again. Since it's a plus sign, I know that both signs in my factors are the same. And which one is it? It's going to be this one. So plus, plus. Okay. And again, I'm going to go to the next page to kind of finish this up so we don't get crowded here. So what I'm at so far is x plus 3 times x plus 1 equals 0. I'm going to set each one of those equal to 0. To get my 2x values, which are negative 3 and negative 1. Now, I'm not finished until I find the y values to go with it. So you see, this one's going to have 2 solutions, which makes sense since we have an x squared term. So I'm going to pick one of the equations. And again, it doesn't matter which one. I'm going to pick the quadratic because it actually looks like it's easier than negative 4x minus 9. So let's just, and if you want to use the other one, that's fine. So I'm going to use y equals x squared minus 6, not 9. And so I'm going to replace, for the first one, I'm going to replace x with negative 3. And that's going to give me 9 minus 6, which is 3. So one of my solutions will be negative 3, 3. I'm going to do the same thing for the second one. I'm going to replace y, but this time I'm going to replace it with negative 1. Negative 1 squared is 1. 1 minus 6 is negative 5. So my second solution will be negative 1, negative 5. And so there's your 2 solutions. And I wanted to give you a third example. This is kind of like one of the other ones you're going to see. I just wanted you to kind of see what you have to do here. You're given a decimal in the problem. I turned it into a fraction. It doesn't matter how you solve it, it's going to work out the same. So what we're going to do here is just like we did in the last one, we're going to substitute. So I'm going to replace y with negative 2x right there to give me negative 2x equals 2/5 x squared. Again, just like the last one, we have to get all terms on one side, so I'm going to add 2x to each side. Now here where this one is different is we end up with a quadratic like this, where you just have two terms, this one's actually going to be a little bit easier to solve. So when I factor this one, and I'm going to go to the next screen, and make sure it was plus. I think it was. Yep. The only way I can factor here is to notice that these two things have a common term. So I'm going to factor out the common term, which is x. And so that's going to leave me with 2/5 x plus 2. Set each one of those equal to 0. So I know x equals 0 is one answer for x. I have to solve this other one for x as well. So I'm going to subtract 2 from each side. And that's going to give me 2/5 x equals -2. And then to solve for x, you have to multiply by a reciprocal. And so those are going to cancel, and we're going to end up with x equals -5. So again, just like before, we're going to have to go find both y values to go with this. So I've got x equals 0 and x equals -5. I'm going to pick this equation this time because it looks like it's easier than messing with the fraction. So I've got y equals -2x as my equation. I've got two answers. I've got one for x equals 0 and one for x equals, I think it was -5. Yep. And so if I plug in 0, I know that one solution will be 0, 0. And if I plug in -5, I know that my second solution will be -5, 10. So I hope this helps you with solving these systems by substitution. If you're still confused, send me a teacher message or make an appointment for help during office hours.